Welcome, Impactful Parents. It's time for the Impactful Parenting Podcast, where I give you parenting tips and resources to make you a more impactful parent to your school-age child. I am your host, Kristina Campos. Welcome, Impactful Parents. Today we're going to be talking about empowering children to prevent sexual abuse. Hello, my name is Kristina Campos, and I'm founder of the Impactful Parent, and I help parents of school-age children who want to be one step ahead of their kids to turn their chaos into connection with their adolescent. I'm a mom of four, a teacher that's taught in every grade from preschool through high school, and today I help moms and dads like yourself to navigate that exhausting, confusing, frustrating, but rewarding world of parenting. So welcome to the Impactful Parent, and today I have a special guest. Her name is Dr. Bronwen Carroll, and Bronwen is a mother of four and a pediatric emergency medicine physician for decades. Dr. Carroll has been treating victims of sexual abuse in the pediatric ER. 1 in 10 children experiences sexual abuse before the age of 18, making it more common than any childhood illness or injury that parents routinely hear about preventing. And yet families are not equipped to talk about it. So we're going to change that today, as Dr. Carroll believes this is a public health crisis and is working to reshape the cultural dialogue and make child protection a priority. So while sexual child abuse is shockingly common, it's also largely preventable. And we're going to be talking about that today because she works with families and schools to equip them with practical strategies like teaching kids to recognize the grooming behaviors and having age-appropriate conversations about safety and healthy relationships so that we can have confident and connected children. I'm really excited to have her on the show today. Our topic is going to be awesome. You need to watch this, parents, as it's so, so important. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as I start, I want to know, as a pediatric emergency medicine physician, you are a mother of four. You've seen this issue from every angle. So what was the specific moment, or maybe a patient story, that made you realize that treating these cases wasn't enough and that you needed to step out of the ER to reshape the public conversation?
So I, as you said, have taken care of children and families who've been harmed by sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual violence for my entire career. And as a mom, I certainly speak to my own children about these issues. But to be perfectly honest, I never really thought about what other parents were doing. Then my daughter's teacher was arrested for possessing childhood sexual abuse materials, which is commonly referred to as child pornography. And I got invited to speak at a community forum along with the local police department who was running the investigation and the district attorney's office who was prosecuting the case. And my role was to speak to families about how they could explain what happened to their kids. So I did that, and I went home and I went to sleep, and I woke up in the morning and I picked up my phone, and my first reaction was that something terrible must have happened. You know, that panic when you pick up your phone and there are like 900 messages and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I miss? And what I missed was the response that I was going to be receiving from parents, because I had text after text and email after email, and they all basically said the same thing, which was, I've never heard any of that before. Thank you so much. We had no idea. And, you know, this is a community of involved parents, of educated parents, highly educated parents. And it was one of those moments where you see something in a different way. And once I realized the fact that parents are really not getting any anticipatory guidance about how to address these issues with their children, I couldn't just go back to business as usual.
I'm so glad that you're doing this work because it is definitely needed. You highlight that 1 in 10 children experiences sexual abuse before the age of 18. I said that in our introduction also. I'd like for you to put that into perspective for our audience as we start this conversation. Why do you call this a public health crisis rather than just a social issue?
So I would say a few things. This is a difficult number to accurately determine because it is based on reporting. And pretty much everybody who knows anything about this agrees that the numbers have to represent underreporting. We know that the overwhelming majority of children who are sexually abused do not disclose right away, if ever. Many of these numbers come from adults who are specifically asked, and while they do disclose, they say that this is the first time they've ever shared this. Assault survivor networks estimate that there are about 42 million adults living in the US who were survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And our birth rate is changing. So these numbers have dropped a little bit. It used to be that of the babies born in about 2020 or so, it was expected that 500,000 of those infants in that year would be assaulted before they're 18. The birth rate's gone down a little bit, so now it may be closer to 350,000 to 400,000. But regardless, these are extraordinary numbers. What other really, really horrible thing will happen to, close to 500,000 babies born this year? There really isn't anything else. And so the reason that I say that it's a public health emergency is two parts. Part of it is the scale, right? Any really terrible thing that's happening to at least 10% of children, I classify that as an emergency. That's not a problem. That is emergent in that it merits strong and fast intervention. That would be part of it. And then it's a broader public health emergency because we know that kids who are sexually abused as children have much, much higher rates of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use, substance abuse, alcohol abuse disorder, and all sorts of other physical health ailments. And so it is a public health emergency because if we can change the face of childhood sexual abuse, we can also dramatically improve the mental and physical health of the adult population.
And what's the most common kind of sexual abuse? I know just from what I've heard, it's always somebody that the child usually knows. But, when we're talking about the different categories of family, maybe stranger, siblings, or coach or teacher, which one is the most common from what you know, and how are the signs different, or are there different signs?
So what I would say is kids are overwhelmingly abused by somebody who they know. And I have not seen in the literature a breakdown. All the things that you said are common. Unfortunately, family members or close family friends are high on the list of who perpetrators are. But also, there's this concept, at least when I was a kid, of the creepy stranger in a van, driving up and offering kids candy. What I always say is the person who may be the greatest risk to kids in your community is likely the nicest guy you know. And so that is because it tends to be the favorite teacher, the trusted coach, the highly regarded doctor or member of the clergy or whatever it is. Because childhood sexual abuse follows a quite predictable pattern with, as you said, grooming, and we can talk more about that. But childhood predators are not looking for a challenge in the sense that this is a very different crime than, for example, an adult violently grabbing somebody in an alley. That typically is not how this goes. And so an FBI detective by the name of Kenneth Lanning, who spent his whole career working on arresting pedophiles, has made the point that any adult with reasonable social skills can pretty much groom any child, which should be sobering for parents to hear, right? So the point is that these people tend to be people who blend into the community or do better than blend in. They're beloved, like my daughter's teacher.
And that's what makes it so scary. What is then the key to prevention, in your opinion, since pretty much the predator is somebody who's going to be close and loving to our child, and we definitely don't want to keep close and loving people away from our kids, right? So how do we prevent this from that wrong person sneaking in and gaining our trust?
So I would say the first thing is by creating family cultures of open communication. By starting to have these conversations. When you start talking to your kids about hard topics, particularly sexual abuse, that alone makes your kids safer. And we can go through what to say and how, but just by opening the door to conversations, that makes your child safer and that makes your child more aware. Then I would say that, so child predators to sexual abuse they require three things. They require access to a child who they perceive to be a potential victim, compliance from that child, and secrecy. So to meet the three requirements that predators have to succeed at sexual abuse, parents and other concerned adults need to execute a three-pronged strategy to meet them where they are and not let this transpire. So in terms of access to a child, parents really need to be aware of who has access to your kids. And as you said, we want our kids to have positive, close relationships with teachers and coaches and relatives and, friends, family friends, all of those things. But parents need to be paying attention. And predators select kids whom they perceive, rightly or wrongly, to have low parental involvement. So parents need to really think about who has access to their child. Think about the context of that access. So predators overwhelmingly abuse children either in the child's home or in their own home. And they do that when they're isolated with the child most frequently. And so being aware of who has access, who's with my child, and in what context. And if somebody seems to really be trying to isolate your kid, all of this, predators use behaviors that can also be benign prosocial behaviors. There's nothing wrong with somebody offering to take your child out for ice cream. That can be lovely. It's not that we don't let those things happen. It's that we educate our kids so they're prepared if it's a problem and we pay attention. We make ourselves visible. So one thing that parents can do is make sure that their children are not perceived as having low parental involvement, which isn't to say that you show up at everything. I'm an ER doctor with 4 kids. I am most definitely not at every practice, every game, everything. I can't be. There would need to be 10 of me. But what I do and what I recommend people do is I introduce myself to the coaches. I drop in unexpectedly on the sitters. And I make sure to communicate that I know what's going on and my kids and I are talking. So I might say, oh, it's so nice to meet you. My child has really been enjoying the new drills you're doing in practice. And this is all true. I genuinely want to meet the coach. It's not that I'm suspicious, and my child genuinely has enjoyed the new drills. But I'm also aware that I'm communicating. I ask what happens at practice and I get answers. I think that it's really important. I do not want to suggest that people need to be moving through the world with suspicion. And I think it is important to have these conversations in ways that are empowering, both for parents and kids. The last thing that we're trying to do is to create anxiety or fearfulness. It's not about fear and suspicion. It's about awareness.
Talking about that awareness for kids, what is the single most important piece of language or maybe a concept that you wish every child was explicitly taught about their body and personal boundaries?
Well, what I would say, so in terms of our 3-pronged strategy, which is access, compliance, the third is secrecy. So if there is just one thing that I could have every parent teach every kid in the world, it should be adults do not ask children to keep secrets. A secret is different from a surprise. With a surprise, the person will eventually find out, and the expectation is that the person will be happy. So a surprise is baking grandma cupcakes for her birthday. Grandma's going to find out, and we expect that she's going to be so happy that we baked her cupcakes. A secret's different. With a secret, nobody is ever supposed to find out. And typically, a secret is being kept a secret because you expect that it would not make people happy. Kids should know that adults never ask children to keep secrets. I love this because it's simple. It's not intimidating or threatening language for parents. It has nothing to do with sex. And it equally applies to kindergartners and high school students. So this can just be a through line throughout childhood. It's useful for two reasons. It is useful because sexual abuse requires secrecy. So if your kids just grow up knowing that if anything's supposed to be a secret, it's a problem. And what I recommend doing is I get into it a little bit past that. So what my messaging is some adults have problems in their heads and their brains don't even work properly. And those adults can be really tricky. And they might not just tell you to keep a secret. They might tell you that if you try to tell the secret, nobody will believe you. They might even say that you'll be hurt or will be hurt if you tell the secret, or that something else bad will happen. And all of those things are lies. And when I talk about this, I use the word lies intentionally. And the reason why is because lies is a strong word. Most of us are not going around telling our kids that other people are liars, right? You know, we might say, oh, maybe they misunderstood, maybe this, maybe that. This is not the time for soft language. This is the time for serious, business language. So those statements are lies. And if anybody ever tells you to keep a secret of any kind, you can come, we can talk through that, and we will believe you, we will protect you, nothing bad will happen, we will keep you safe. Now, an interesting thing about the secrecy piece is when my oldest child was young and we first started talking about this, I thought we'd have the conversation, we'd have maybe a refresher down the line and it would never come up again. What I've learned is that actually this comes up quite frequently. So, for example, we were on a family ski trip last year. And after dinner, my 8-year-old sort of looked at me and said sheepishly, my ski instructor got me hot chocolate today, but she said not to tell you that it was a secret. And my older kids kind of looked at her and looked at each other and looked at me because, they knew where this was going. And she did too, which is why she told me. And so I said, what do you think I think when you say that? And she said, I think you think that adults don't ask kids to keep secrets. Great. Now, I think that my daughter's ski instructor is wonderful. I don't think that there was anything nefarious in this interaction. Secrets are fun. Secrets are bonding. The problem is that sexual predators know that secrets are bonding too. And so then the next step of this, once your kids understand about secrets, is planning the response. So what my daughter and I worked on is the next time she would say, thank you so much for the hot chocolate. I am going to tell my mom, though, because in our family, we don't keep secrets. And the beauty of that is, first of all, it's teaching your child to advocate for himself or herself. But also, if this is a brewing problematic situation, your child has just signaled somebody with ill intentions. I'm the wrong kid. We're the wrong family. We don't keep secrets and you should back off.
I love this so much. It is so easy. It is implementable, and it goes across all ages of, I see my high school kids saying the same thing. I see a preschool saying the same thing. So that's really, really awesome. I want to get into recognizing some of the signs here, because most parents aren't looking for obvious things, right? Bruises, for example. What are some subtle, maybe non-physical red flags, maybe changes in behavior, mood, sleep, that you see in the ER that families and educators should be trained and be watching out for so that we can catch this stuff?
In terms of what to watch out for before it's the signs in the kid, because if you're seeing signs in a kid, that means that something's happening, right? So I would move forward or back rather. And just first talk a little bit about the grooming process itself, because the grooming process is unbelievably predictable. So there is literature, criminal justice literature, which comes out of prison systems. And so convicted child predators are interviewed about what they do and how they do it. And if you get into this literature, you realize pretty quickly, child predators are like a football team that has been winning with a single play. They all do the same thing. And it appears that nobody has watched the tapes to figure this out. But if we can teach families to recognize and defend the play, then you shouldn't even get to the point where there are signs of a problem. So the way that grooming usually works is it starts out with benign shared secrets. And that's a test. Predators are testing out kids to see how they respond. So, for example, if your child responds with, "We don't keep secrets," the predator is going to move on. Then what they tend to do is they tend to give kids who they are grooming special gifts and special privileges. So that can look like one child's allowed to stay up late for a secret movie viewing after everybody else goes to bed. Or one child, is taken out for something special, or is, given special books, toys, whatever else. So as part of the secrecy thing, adults should also not be giving anyone secret gifts or privileges. Then predators desensitize children to touch, and they desensitize children to sexual material. So what that usually looks like is, before there's anything sexual going on, predators try to get kids to a point where they are accustomed to the predator touching them. And so that just starts out in very benign ways. A back rub, roughhousing with tickling, brushing up against somebody. Now, again, these can all be perfectly benign behaviors. It's not as if everybody who gives your child a hug, should be viewed as a problem. But another good message for kids is, if an adult seems to be touching you more than other adults, particularly if then they act like it's an accident, if you reply, that's something that we should talk about. Because think about, when's the last time you accidentally touched another child's body who isn't in your family? That isn't something that normally happens. It certainly doesn't happen repeatedly. And so that can be a sign. Then the other piece of this is that predators want to acclimate kids to sexual material, sexual talk. And so another thing to tell your child is, outside of our family conversations, a conversation with your pediatrician, health class at school, outside of those very specific areas, adults should not be talking to kids about sex. And if telling jokes about sex, anything like that, and if that's happening, that's something that you should tell me. Adults should not be having pictures of people without clothes on lying around, or videos playing in the background when you go visit. And if you ever see anything like that, I want to know about that right away.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. How educational is that for parents to know those steps? It is great to hear and learn that, because now we can be preventative. Now, as I'm listening to you, there are two different types of sexual abuse that I want to ask you about, that are one common and one I feel is not talked about. I'll start with the non-talked about one, and that is sibling sexual abuse. I had a lovely woman years ago come onto the podcast, and I did an episode on this with her. And ever since that day, it really was enlightening to know how often this actually happens in the home. So my question to you is about this dynamic when the abuser is, again, another child or like an older sibling. Most of the time, what I've heard from what my education is that most of the time this is like an older sibling, experimenting on a younger sibling. And not all the time is it malicious. Sometimes it is, so how is this different? How can parents be aware? And obviously there's a lot of emotional charge that happens around this, because you don't have that outside of the house predator that you're trying to point a finger at. Now these are your children.
Mm-hmm. So I would say almost always in that scenario, the older child who's become a perpetrator was sexually abused himself or herself, almost always. And so if we as a culture can really get ahead of this with adults, I think we will simultaneously solve most of what you're talking about. Then the two other things that I would say is that by creating a culture of open communication within families, by making clear that you have a family that talks about everything, and by putting it on the table that you will believe your children. That's the number one reason that kids don't disclose is fear of not being believed. And so you just take that off the table. We will believe you. We will protect you. Then you have at least created an environment where a younger child can come to you. And then the other thing that I think is super important that I talk about a lot is I think it is really useful to introduce to our children the concept of holding both. So holding both is the idea that you can feel two conflicting emotions simultaneously. So you can love your sister so much and be so angry that she drew on your American Girl doll. That's holding both. You can love me so much and be so angry that I won't buy you a cell phone. You can know that I'm not getting you a phone because I believe it's in your best interest and still feel really lonely when all your friends are scrolling TikTok. Holding both is a useful concept for adults, for kids, for everybody. So it's a great thing to talk about as a way of normalizing ambivalence and internal conflict. But holding both is particularly important when it comes to childhood sexual abuse. And the reason why is because, as we started out talking about, perpetrators are often, almost always, people who kids like or love. And so when you introduce this concept of holding both, it also helps kids disclose any sexual abuse, right? Because you can really admire your coach, you can really like your teacher, and you can be really upset about how they've started acting differently. But that is also particularly important for sexual abuse that's happening with families, because you can really love your brother, your uncle, your grandpa, and feel really uncomfortable with what's happening.
Such a strong statement, and what a great lesson for parents. I mean, just that's great for across the board for things. Yes, you can have both. I love that. And then the other type of abuse that I feel a lot of our parents may experience in their own families is teenage dating rape, that type of thing.
Yes.
Our audience here at the Impactful Parent is parents of school-age children. So we have a lot of emerging teenagers in our families. We have a lot of teens that are dating right now. And I mean, I think we all know, and maybe several of us even listening can say, oh yeah, I've been there. I was in a date and it didn't end well. So what do you say about that, about this particular thing? Then how can parents, again, prevent, be aware, and again, just putting up these specialized abusing scenarios to parents during this podcast? Because I don't want to just talk about, yes, we want to talk about the big picture, but these two things I feel really hit families hard.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you raised this because, when I say that I do sexual abuse prevention work with families, that is actually a huge umbrella. That covers everything from talking to college students about the risks of intoxication beyond the intoxication itself in terms of sexual assault. And that includes talking to very young children about bodily autonomy. And as you said, everything in between. So adolescence is absolutely a high risk time for sexual assault, for exploitation. The whole online category of sexual abuse is a whole other, house under this big, ugly umbrella. But in terms of dating violence, I think there are two categories. The first piece of it is the building blocks for healthy romantic relationships in adolescence and young adulthood, and really your whole life, are grown out of navigating childhood friendship. And so I actually think that this conversation starts long before anybody's dating. Where this starts is in elementary school. So all of us have, I think every kid goes through social struggles. Sometimes kids are in good places with friends and everything else, and sometimes they're the odd one out. And I think as parents, we all, because we're busy and there's a lot going on, we tend to focus a lot on these issues when our child is feeling sad, right? Of course we do. But I would say it is equally important to talk to your kids about friendship when friendship is going well. So what friendship is supposed to be is people who make you feel good and who build you up. And I feel like we have all had these friends who, when we're with them, we always end up feeling bad, right? Which is the opposite of what's supposed to happen. If you think of sort of your inner self as little candle, you want your friends to be people who nurture and fan that flame. But then there are these friends who it kind of feels like they're trying to snuff you out. And so talking to your elementary school children about how their friends make them feel is a really important conversation to have, because you want to introduce the idea early, long before romance is on the table, that your child should be picking people who make him or her feel good and confident and valued and considered. And the reason why that's helpful is because when romantic relationships go south in adolescence and beyond, in adulthood, dismissive, demeaning, controlling behaviors are the opposite of what we should be encouraging our kids to seek out in childhood friendship. And so establishing early how they should be treated by another person in any form of relationship is really helpful. So that would be in terms of navigating unhealthy romantic relationships, which can frequently involve sexual assault, sexual exploitation, pressuring people either to engage in sexual activity that they don't feel ready for, to send nudes. That's a huge thing for adolescents right now. The majority of girls who send nudes report feeling pressured and like they didn't have a choice. And so talking to kids early about the dynamics of relationships is important. But there's a second story, which is when you're in a new situation. So this maybe isn't a boyfriend where things are spiraling. This is the first time you're alone with a person and things are not feeling safe. I would say that this too starts with very young children, and this has to do with listening to your inner voice. So from a very, very young age, this is actually what I talk to families of preschoolers about. We want to be encouraging children to listen to their inner voice. And the reason why we want to do that is because then when they are in adolescence, they are hopefully well trained in listening to that voice inside them that says, I'm not sure about this. This isn't great. And we want them to feel empowered to not get in the car, to decline the drink, to skip the movie and go home. The other thing that I would say is it is important to talk to kids of all ages about exit strategies in situations that don't feel safe to them. And what that exit strategy is obviously depends on the age. It's going to be different for an 8-year-old than it is from a 16-year-old. But to talk about that in advance, and not just to talk about it, but to role play. So to say to your children, what are you going to say to the football player? What are you going to say to grandpa? What are you going to say to the coach? What are you going to say to the babysitter? How are you going to get yourself out of that situation? Because we all get better at everything with practice, and that includes emergencies, right? This is why we have fire drills. This is why the flight attendants show you what to do with the oxygen mask. So you want to have those kinds of drills with your kids so that if your child is on a date that is starting to feel unsafe, they have practiced how they're getting out.
I could talk about this with you for so long because there's so much that we can dive deep into. I'll tell the audience that if you are looking for more, I know on my content, whether you're on the YouTube channel or you're inside the Impactful Parent app, search out sibling sexual abuse. You'll have that episode. I also have an episode on, it's called Sex, Drugs, and Peer Pressure. And I talk a lot about what you're saying here about preparing and role playing some of these scenarios with your kids. So take a look at those episodes, parents. And one last thing with you is that if you are listening and you are resonating with Bronwen, then I want you to know more about her. She actually has a new book that's going to be coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about that new book? What is the name of it? So we can keep an eye out for it. And any other work that, if our listeners are listening and they can reach out to you, how could they get more?
Yeah, that is great. So the book is a work in progress. It is likely going to be called We Need to Be Talking About This, because we do need to be talking about that. But details on that are to be determined. I have a website where that information will be available. It's Bronwen Carroll. It's a hard name. It's BRONWENCARROLLMD. That is my handle. So I think last week, started on TikTok and Instagram. With reels talking about lots of this stuff. So people can find me on TikTok, Instagram. I actually do a school where I spoke, Film to Talk. That is on YouTube. And I have my website. And so people can certainly come and find me. I really believe that our parenting generation is ready for this. I think that people have had enough. I think that people are more comfortable with communicating with their kids openly. And I believe that just as Mothers Against Drunk Driving, now Parents Against Drunk Driving in the 80s, really changed the face of what was once a super common dangerous behavior, I think that our generation can change what sexual abuse prevention looks like. And by doing that, can change an epidemic.
Thank you for listening today. Remember to subscribe and share this podcast with a friend. And don't forget, the Impactful Parenting Podcast is an extension of the Impactful Parent community. Go to the Impactful Parent website and download the free Impactful Parent app so you don't miss a parenting tip that can help you and your family. Thanks for listening today. So go to theimpactfulparent.com and see you next episode.